So my name is Jenny Butler, and I'm from the Folklore and Ethnology Department. So I'm interested in meaning making in culture, and my topic is Irish witchcraft and neo-paganism. And I've called the presentation "It's Not All Cloak and Dagger" because it's a topic that's shrouded in mystery, and it also causes a lot of fear because people don't really know what it is and have a lot of negative associations with it. Here you'll see in this picture here, there is a druid named Mel. He's wearing a robe or cloak, and in the picture over here are 3 ethames or ritual daggers. So pagans actually use cloaks and daggers. So what is neo-paganism? It can be defined as a nature religion or earth-based spirituality, because characteristically pagans have a very deep spiritual connection to the natural landscape. But there's a problem in strictly defining it as a religion, because many followers or practitioners of paganism would view it more as a philosophy or a way of life. And also, a lot of people have a problem with the term religion itself, because they connect that more with institutionalized religion, and they see spirituality as something different to that. So paganism is an umbrella term or a catch-all term for a whole range of different magical and spiritual traditions. So the first thing I had to do was decide what I was going to include in my research, so to narrow it down from all the different kinds of paganism. And I decided to include Pagan Witchcraft, which includes Wicca, and also to include Druidry and everyone who self-identifies as pagan generically or earth-based spiritualist. Wicca is a modern form of witchcraft that was founded by a man named Gerald Gardner in the 1950s, and there are other forms of pagan witchcraft as well. It's important to point out that not all pagans are witches and not all witches are pagans. For example, there are satanic witches, and satanic witches would venerate or use Satan or Lucifer as a figurehead. And pagans look back much further to the old religion or to indigenous religion, so it's prior to Christianity. They don't recognize the Christian mythology or the Christian pantheon, so they wouldn't be devil worshippers. And among the general public, there's a lot of confusion between paganism and devil worship and so on, because the occult is kind of lumped together. So my methodology, or how I went about my research, was to first locate my informants, or the people who are going to tell me about paganism and what it's like to be pagan. And I started on the internet and networking among the people that I met as well, and I was looking for people to interview. And this was quite difficult for me at the start, because the pagan community thought that I might be a journalist. So after a while, and after I'd interviewed my key informants, or very well-known pagans, it became easier for me to find other people to talk to. And the kind of interviewing I've done is ethnographic interviewing. This is a conversational style, a very in-depth, one-to-one interviewing, so to gain insight into different aspects of pagan culture. I also conducted participant observation, which is taking part in events which for me are rituals and festivals. Being a participant observer is trying to be an insider, so trying to be like a pagan, to try and understand what it's like to be pagan, what kinds of things they do and why, but also to be an outsider because I'm an academic and I'm analysing this data I'm collecting. So it's like walking a tightrope between insider and outsider simultaneously. You're both. So my research question is twofold. Firstly, I'm looking at what characterises neo-pagan worldview. So worldview is the belief system or set of beliefs. And secondly, I'm looking at how this worldview is expressed through ritual behaviour. And ritual, very simply, can be defined as symbolic behaviour. Neo-pagan worldview has been called a magical worldview, because typically pagans believe in magic and in deities such as the old gods of Europe, and also in spirits and fairies and other entities. So here there's a picture of Boan, or Boand as she's called. She's a Celtic goddess. This is a painting by a pagan artist named Jane Brydeson, And this goddess is connected with the River Boyne in County Meath, and she's sitting on, it's like the capstone at Newgrange, a sacred site for pagans in County Meath. So paganism can be said to be polytheistic as opposed to monotheism, which is the belief in one God. So poly is many, and again, it's the old religion, as it's described, going back further than Christianity. It's also been described as pantheistic. That's the belief that the sacred is inherent in nature, that the landscape itself is divine. And a similar concept is animism, or the belief that everything, even inanimate objects, has its own soul or spirit, and we're all connected on a spiritual plane or connected by energy. So how I attempted to analyze neo-pagan worldview was to look at Neopagan Discourse, how pagans talk about themselves. And part of this was to find insider terminology. So I look at interviews, these ethnographic interviews, and I look at what themes and topics come up again and again. And insider terminology would be how pagans refer to themselves. So I avoid imposing my own labels or academic labels on things, but I would ask, for example, my first question is normally, do you consider yourself a pagan? And the person will then describe what paganism is to them. I find that's the best way of collecting different descriptions and definitions of what paganism means. So I'm also looking at identity construction, and that's a phrase that we use in folklore study. It's not unique to pagans or to religious movements. Everybody constructs their own identity. So I'm looking at the cultural resources, or what different cultural aspects people draw from to construct their identity. So for pagans, this would be their use of mythology, how they venerate or how they claim to communicate with the deity or the divine, how they view history and what parts of history are most important to them. For example, a lot of pagans would find pre-Christian paganism with a small p to be very important to their identity or their understanding of pre-Christian times. And I'm also looking at the interconnectedness of sacred sites and the landscape and ancestor worship and mythology, how these things are interconnected. I mentioned pre-Christian paganism with a small p, the spelling. Many pagans feel that the word pagan should be capitalized because the other major religions are capitalized, like Christian, Judaism, so on. I use the prefix neo to distinguish the modern day cultural movement from this pre-Christian paganism, because it becomes difficult to talk about both kinds of paganism without causing confusion. So some of the different rituals I'm looking at would be rites of passage or life cycle rituals. And this would include baby blessings. These would be welcoming rituals for babies. Weddings, or hand fastings as pagans call them, and funerals. I'm also looking at initiation rituals. When Wiccans are initiated or join a coven, this is a ritual group of witches, they become a priest or priestess. So they view themselves as a member of clergy. And you'll see here in the bumper sticker, it says clergy, and there's a circle with a pentacle or a five-pointed star in the circle. This is a Wiccan symbol for clergy, and often Wiccans will wear the pentacle as a necklace. I've been lucky enough to take part in the initiation of a druid into a grove, which is a ritual group of druids, and I've also been at the ordination of an Druidry, which is the Irish for high druid. And in the other photograph here, you see a druid being inaugurated at the Hill of Tara. That's the Hibernian order of druids. Another kind of ritual is festival ritual, or the ritual year of pagans. It's conceptualized as a wheel with the spokes passing through the seasonal transitions. So each spoke is one festival. So you have Samhain, which is Halloween in our modern calendar. You have winter solstice, Imbolc, which marks the start of spring, spring equinox, Bealtaine, which marks the start of summer. Summer solstice, which is today. It's normally celebrated on the 21st by pagans, even though the solstice can actually vary by a day either way. This photograph here is of a procession of pagans up to Rathgráine on the Hill of Tara in County Meath. The Hill of Tara is one of the most important sacred sites for Irish neo-pagans, and they have torches here to, this ceremony was at the evening. In the evening, the torches were to reflect the power of the sun on the solstice, so the sun is at its zenith today. You also have Lunasa, which is the harvest ritual, and autumn equinox. So another part of the ritual context that I would look at is material culture, or the physical, tangible objects that people use. So I'm looking at their symbolic significance in the ritual, and that would include things like food and drink and how items are used. And I'm also looking at body modification as part of material culture. So that would be tattoos and piercings and their spiritual significance. So here in this picture at the bottom right, you'll see a picture of a green man tattoo on the arm, and this is a vegetation deity. In the other picture, you see two druids standing with a big bog oak staff with a snake coiled around it. Staffs are used in ritual, as are wands. This is a snake wand, also made of bog oak, made by the druid on the right. The snake is a symbol of healing, and the snake also represents pre-Christian paganism, or the serpent. So there are many ethical considerations when conducting this kind of research, one of which is to be very clear about my role as researcher, to make people aware that I'm actually conducting research. And when you're doing long-scale qualitative research, it's very important to remind people that you're doing research, because sometimes they forget when you're taking part in a community over a long period of time. Another important thing is to protect the identity of informants or interviewees. And the flip side of that is to make sure that I credit neo-pagan artists, for example, where I'm using their work because there's a copyright issue. And also to get permission to use photographs where people appear. There are many academic resources online, one of which is paganstudies.org, and there's the Pomegranate Journal, which is devoted to the scholarly study of paganism. But even though pagan studies is emerging as a discipline in its own right, as its own field, it's still very much on the fringe of mainstream academia. So ethnographic research into paganism still requires a lot of work to be done. And as far as I'm aware, I'm the only person doing large-scale, like PhD-scale research on Irish witchcraft and neo-paganism. Thank you.